Welcome back to another great episode of Beyond the Buckets. Today, my guest, all the way from New Zealand, Olly Wood. Welcome to the program.
Great to be here, Chris. Thank you.
So, Olly, I love the fact that you're a coach and you are the founder of the Meta Project, and we'll get into all of that. But I got to know a fun fact about you before we start. Even if somebody knew you, a fun fact that maybe even those closest to you don't even know.
Yeah. Ooh, that closest to me, I don't know. But if we're looking at the space of people that have come into our world, understanding a little bit more about what we do, sometimes the preconception there is that it's quite physical, right? It's the idea of how we show up, how we look, the confidence aspect. But if we start to look a bit deeper into understanding how we feel, how we show up, and a lot of that being internal, I think that's something I've really dived into over the last couple of years, simply because that physical element was sort of taken away from me, right? And I had a pretty major crash about a year and a bit ago now on a motorbike around a track. And I've done every sport under the sun. It's just one of the ones that I've done there.
Yeah.
We were going about 200K. So what's that? I'm not going to do the calculation, but 200Ks now down the straight, which is pretty quick. And got to the point where I'd say about 8 or 9 laps in, we had full brake failure on the front and went straight into the barrier at that speed. So what would usually be a pretty life-changing, if not fatal, crash. Was pretty lucky. I dislocated a shoulder, which I'd done quite a few times before from rugby and all the rest. But tore a lot of muscles off that whole side. Took a long time to fix. And meant I went from about 115 kilos, 110, which I usually sort of walk around at with a lot more muscle, and dropped about 15 kilos of straight muscle weight. If anything, I put body fat on. So the 30 pounds that I dropped there made a pretty big difference in how I physically looked, right? And I think that was a really, really big challenge and quite an important lesson in understanding that attachment to your physical look and understanding sometimes that deeper character is built by how you feel and those steps you put in place, even though it's not physically showing, right? It looked like I hadn't lifted a weight in a while,
Right.
But it was taking that time to really feel good, right? And you're still anchoring in those habits of the morning walk. You're still anchoring in the habits of being able to eat well so you feel good, even if it's not showing physically. And I think sometimes that's a really cool reminder for the clients we're working with and the progress we're going through is don't look at the end destination as the outcome. Look at the process there that creates a bit of character in that way. And I think for me, that was a really, really big reminder. And sometimes people are, you're back in shape now. Like, what do you mean? And then I had a pretty massive crash that I was surprised to walk away from. And I think it made a huge shift in how I coach now.
Wow. Unbelievable story. I didn't know that you were going to say that, but I'm glad that you did and you shared that with us. Coming back from injuries as an athlete, I was injured in college and I tore my shoulder up pretty bad and had to get shoulder surgery. There's so many doubts that come into your mind about are you going to return the same? Are you going to be, worse than you were before? And that's a real big thing when it comes to athletics is the mindset and understanding. Look, the doctor has given me a clean bill of health. I should feel healthy, but sometimes in your mind you don't. And so you make some really good points there. Number one, somebody definitely is looking over you. And I know that, because you survived that, you can now help other people during that journey. I'm sure you found yourself in some different mindset things, and I'm sure you're probably a pretty strong-minded person, strong-willed. But what were some of the down moments during that time as you tried to come back?
Yeah, well, I think all of us, we live and breathe this idea of health. We try to look at this as being an improvement of mind and body, and that was always been a big part of our message, but it really challenged that. To realize that became so much less of a physical aspect. And I was always, I've always been involved at some level talking about how big that mindset component is and looking at how that, the physical allows us to show up a certain way, but it's that mental aspect that we really need to dive into. That just took that to a whole new level, right? Because I didn't have that physical element anymore and I had to really work through that process. Not only was it one injury and then rebuild back up, it was one injury, delay that for 5 months to actually get a surgery, start from ground zero again, and then build through that. So, I'm getting to the first point where I've done my first pull-up in 12 months, right, the other day, and really building through that process.
Wow.
We've probably put on about 6-7 kilos, and we're rebuilding, and it's quite. I've retuned that to become quite enjoyable journey at some level, because rather than the frustration of the shoulder and this and that, I'm lifting a 2 kilo dumbbell again, and it's becoming a celebration.
Yeah.
And just really challenging yourself to, you're not playing someone else's game, you're playing your own progress, right? And yes, you've been given a curveball, but let's really lean into your journey, your focus, right? And I think when we work with so many clients on a day-to-day basis, there's a comparison aspect. There's I'm behind, I'm not where I should be. That's all irrelevant. Where are you at right now, and what's the next step you need to take? What's that next domino? So I've been living and breathing that, and just taking that to a new level.
Yeah. And a lot of people talk about, living in the moment and being where your feet are. And that's exactly it. And, you can't get to that next moment without the moment that you're in currently. So when we're on this podcast, the only thing that I'm focused on is our conversation. And that's really all we can be focused on at that moment. And, I used to try to multitask quite often, but it really doesn't work. And then I read the 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And it talks about how you can manage your time a little bit better instead of always, like, one of the big takeaways is, like, I used to always have my email up if I had the computer up. And if I was doing something else, well, anytime an email comes in, and they come in constantly, even if it's a non-important email, it takes you away from your focus at that time in space. And you cannot focus on what you're actually really doing. So if let's just say I was cutting a podcast to be, I'm taking whatever time I took, 30 seconds or a minute or whatever, and now I'm no longer thinking about what the original task is. But you can literally probably get through most of your emails within a 30-minute segment. It's not like you're writing novels. And so if you only pick 2 times a day to look at your email, well, you're going to be more efficient in the rest of your time. So when you're talking about that, I think about that in beating the math and being efficient with everything that you have, and really living in the moment where you're at now, and not really focus on what came before, what's coming after. It's really about right now.
Yeah, and getting past the noise. I think the idea of just being intentional with what's best use of your time. It's not replying to someone via email. I've literally just got off my call with my main coaching team, and I said, cool, tell me what's urgent, tell me what needs to be focused on right now, and give me the main nuggets that I need to know, so I'm not sifting through emails. I'll look at that at 12 o'clock, but what do I need to know now, right? Because there's blocks of time where I need to get things done, and I've got those blocks locked out. And I think trying to make sure that you, whether that be exercise, whether that be sitting down for a meal, whether that be going for a walk and getting off your butt, those are booked into your calendar just as much as that big work meeting, right? Because if we're not being intentional with our time, it always comes last, right? And I think we're all getting into the habit with all these work obligations, deadlines, and requests from every direction. We always come last if we're not intentional with that focus. And if we can shift that back to, as you've said, being more productive, but coming back to the health aspect, that's being productive, being effective as well.
For sure. Why don't you give a 2.5-minute origin story on you and kind of how you got to where you're at right now?
Yep. Well, for me, I started off in the PT space. I was working in a gym, going through that whole process. I was very much, to that point, had done every sport under the sun, trying to understand all those skill sets and all those different, sometimes correlations, but just, as we said before, right, diving into the skill set required, we start to get a really good insight into, it's nice to be the F1 driver. It's nice to be the rugby player, whatever it might be. But do you actually want to live that every day? And the skill sets and the habits that need to be applied every day. So just diving into that world to start with really allowed me to get a pretty good head start on what was required, rather than, I think a lot of PTs are channel visioned into bodybuilding or channel visioned into running. So understanding the scope of that and what was required for all of those sports to really thrive was a nice platform to build on. So for me, I knew that I knew something about fitness, but there was so much more I didn't know. So it was just that learning mindset of going deeper and deeper into that space, and investing in coaches with money I didn't have for years and years and years to continue to find out from the best and just get an idea of what that really looked like, to build a platform of actual knowledge rather than just one category, one sport to build from there. And we got really, really good at exercise progression, got an idea of exercise execution and just how to move properly in a gym. We were coaching PTs around the country and going through this process of really just mastering training. The problem was, as we started to get better and better at that, and when I say we, it's me, I got so used to it, us as a team now, going back to when it was just me is different. But
right.
through that process, there was, I was working with higher and higher level clients. There was a lot of business professionals. There's a lot of high corporate level clients coming through. And what I was finding is we were perfecting training. We were adding in all this cool stuff, but it made absolutely no difference because they were walking through the door with that level of stress and inflammation that was causing so much issues before they'd even started training. They weren't able to recover or get that stimulus or get the results from that stimulus in the gym, right? So we can build out these fancy trainings, we can add in bands or whatever it is to make training look good, but we need to look at that root cause. So over time, my shift with training was, it was 100% training to start with because that was my gig, and then it was 80% training, 20% nutrition. That was 50% training, 50% lifestyle design, and we started to look at more and more of these components of what's actually going to get you moving forward, what's actually going to elicit results, because we're smashing with training, we're getting stronger, but that belly's still there, that energy's still low, your sleep's still off, right? So getting a look at all these other components that allowed us to just dive so much deeper. Again, it just started from that learning mindset of knowing there were so many more components to this than just exercise. We started to build a really good awareness of what those look like. Going through that same process as well, I got to a point where the business got so big that I was still that bottleneck. I was still taking on more and more clients, and I was training well, I was eating well, but my sleep was going to shit. My training was starting to suffer from a recovery standpoint, and I wasn't dropping body fat, right? So I was living and breathing again that space myself and seeing how much, even when I was perfecting those steps and knowing that those were going well, there were other components I was missing. So it just allowed me to keep going deeper and deeper and work through those layers to find out what does that body really need, and working with the best experts to understand what that looked like. And for us, getting an idea of this gut health is a really nice starting point that we look at, because it's so expansive with what we're looking at, right? We can eat really good food, but what are all the other components that come into better nutrition, better health, right? We're looking at stress, we're looking at digestion, we're looking at the sleep quality, to the point that we can have a nice fancy meal in front of us, but all of those decisions, all of those components make the decision before that mouthful goes down, right? So taking that time to look at those and bringing awareness to that skill set is a bigger part of what was built around the Meta Project, right? A higher level of self-awareness is what that means, and taking the time to dive into all of those components of better health.
Wow, I love it. There's several places that I'd like to go, and I'm going to bullet point them now just so I don't forget them, and if I do forget, just please let me know. But I do want to talk about movement and how that all works. I want to talk about stress. I want to talk about sleep. I want to talk about inflammation, and then I also want to talk about gut health as well. So if I miss any of these as we go along, just make sure we kind of round about and go back and double tap on that. But the first thing is movement. How important is it to move your body in the correct way, whether it be Olympic lifts where you are doing, whether it be light, moderate, or heavyweight? How important is that your squat form, if you're doing cleans or things that are overhead? How important is that as far as movement and conditioning your body go?
Yeah. So if we go one step back, we're going to look at this component of why are we exercising, right? So if we look at the intention, is it something that's helping us or hurting us? Is it something that's building us up or breaking us down? And if we look at that as a motivation, is it something that we're working towards, or is it something we're running away from? It allows us to really look at the motivation behind it, because a lot of people still look at it as exercise as their punishment, right? And then we look at athletes that it's a part of refining that skill set, right? Something they enjoy. Other people, it'd be a case of that stress relief or being able to really just breathe and feel alive in that day. So there's different components and attachments to exercise that we all have that we want to take into account, so we know that when we go into the gym or we do that exercise, it's out of love, not hate, which is going to make a huge difference to what we're actually doing and what we're achieving from that. But once we look at the exercise component, again, that's going to be an idea of what's going to be productive and what is the goal. All right. So if the goal is just mindset and it's getting rid of the stress for the day, going for a good run, having a good sweat, throwing around a couple of weights is going to be maybe your version of stress relief, right? But the other component to that is, are we trying to elicit a goal? Is that fat loss? Is it specific to a certain sport? Because a lot of people get into running thinking it's going to help with fat loss. It might work for a month or two because it hasn't been done before, right? It's a new stimulus. And then you get to a point that you just get better at running. It's no longer a good fat loss activity, right? So taking a look at, is it more that mindset base? And this is where the reason I bring that up is because we channel so far into what's effective for our clients from a fat loss standpoint, but they like running, right? I'm like, if you love running and it's improving that mindset, go for it and make sure that's a part of your weekly, routine, because we don't want to remove that because we know how big mindset is with that physical component. But if we dive into that physical element, and we work a lot of men and women over 40, so looking at this component of what changes over time, what used to work in your 20s does not work in your 40s, 50s, and realizing that sometimes it takes a little bit more to build that tissue, or at very minimum maintain it, right? Which is so important for dropping the body fat, keeping that strength, keeping the proprioception of balance, right? Just keeping all of those main components there. So I think for most people, if not everyone, that weight training needs to be a component of it. But what do we look at in regards to focus within training? It's not slinging around a dumbbell and completing 10 reps, right? It's how are we contracting a muscle? What are we stabilizing? Are we taking that time to really feel our body, right? And I think when we're so disconnected and it's a head on some random body, reconnecting those two and finding what we can feel, what's working, what needs firing, makes a big difference to, I've got a pain in my back, let's get someone else to fix it. I've got a pain in my back, what can I do to help? How can I build this skill set to improve how I feel, how I function on a day-to-day basis? So I think for us, we definitely lean towards the weight training component as being a foundation of health and building that body back up. But we want to make sure that we're taking into account the goal and the reason for the exercise. Yeah, you're muted.
If somebody was not a very active person, would you recommend cardiorespiratory exercise, or would you recommend muscular strength exercise for somebody that doesn't move their body a whole lot?
Yeah, if they're not exercising, then anything is better than nothing, right? But the component we're going to look into there is going to be looking at what is that first step, right? And I think a lot of people do this too wrong, is right, on a health kick, let's go, and I'm going to add in 5 sessions, right? And it's going to bury me in 2 weeks because I don't have the recovery, I don't have the ability to respond to what's happening, and I'm leaving a whole bunch of results on the table. So for us, it would be taking a time to find out what that looks like, right? It could be a simple 20-minute walk around the block. If you add that in 2 times this week, that's still 2 times more than last week, right? Then we can build it to 3, then we can go to 4, and then we can look at these other aspects that you want to explore, right? If we start to look at these other components of nutrition and sleep and all of these aspects that build us up, which we always look at first, by the way, we're now looking at the ability to recover and feel good, right? So if we're with our clients through the Meta Project, we make sure that we're looking at the nutrition and building a foundation first, so they actually feel like exercising, right? Rather than the first step being like, cool, let's dive into exercise straight away. We don't have that base to work on. So we've found guys many times, we're like, cool, all I need you to do is a 20-minute walk. You can manage that. We're going to look at that nutrition component, really build back up that energy. And they find themselves being like, well, I got halfway through my walk and now I wanted to go for a run because I just felt like my energy was so much better. So they make those choices and they find those ways to get more exercise in because we're finally building that body back up first.
Right. Makes sense for sure. Talk a little bit about the, stress. So many of the diseases that we, or health conditions that we get as human beings are particularly derived from stress. So tell how stress works, as well as, there's, multiple different stresses, but acute, episodic, things like that. But tell me how stress works and then how we're supposed to help relieve some of the stresses in our lives.
Yeah. So that's going to really tie in the inflammatory standpoint, the gut health side, and really all of it, because what we're looking at is where is that stress coming from, like you said, and there's all the fancy versions you used, but we like to put it into 3 categories of stress, right? So we're going to have that physical stress, which if we look at exercise as one component, we've both got too little or we've got too much. If we're not exercising at all, the stress is we're not getting any circulation of blood around our body, we're not getting that, getting nutrients working for us. If we're training too much, that can be just as unhelpful. Typically it's under recovery rather than overtraining, but we're still training too much for what we can recover from, right? So taking that time to look at building that body back up. If we're training so damn hard that our body's not working like it used to, remember the audience we work with being that over 40, we want to make sure we're working with your hormones. We want to make sure we're working with your body rather than trying to work with our 20-year-old self that had no, stress in the day. It's going to be completely different. So starting there is a really cool place to start. The psychological stress, right? Our body keeps a score of what's coming through mentally, right? So taking that time to look at your psychological stress, what's coming through with the work deadlines, how are we finding our home life? What are those aspects that are coming into our space? Because again, if we're in a high stress state, meaning our cortisol's gone up, which is our main stress hormone, that's going to jack up our glucose in our body as well. And we're not going to be in a state to digest food because all of that blood is going to be pulled towards the muscle. We're in that fight or flight response, right? Most of us are aware of that, but pulling that blood towards the muscle means that it's pulling it away from that digestive tract. We're not going to be in a position to digest that food properly. So we've already changed our ability to digest food, and we haven't changed the food on the plate. We've changed our ability to digest it. So looking at that psychological stress and knowing how much that's going to impact the physical, it's a really, really cool place to start. And then the third one that we're looking at, which is that digestive stress, right? What's coming through in the gut? What are we eating that's actually causing further stress to our body? If we know that there's a really big resistance or even a allergy to something like gluten or dairy coming through, if you add that food in, it's going to be a pretty big impact on how you feel on a day-to-day basis. So getting an idea of what are those foods in your diet that we have or haven't identified yet, that we can build that body back up so we're not causing extra damage to that gut lining. We're not causing extra toxicity and inflammation in the body that, again, is going to cause stress to that overall component. So if we're going to look at 3 buckets, those would be those 3 that we tie into to look at where stress comes from and what would be one of those buckets we need to identify first. Of course, all 3 are going to be helpful, but it's managing those to lower down that stress and get your body building or feeling better again.
Yeah, I never really thought about stress by the gut health and what you're actually putting into your body. I take a probiotic and a prebiotic, and I feel that it works. A lot of these stuff that we might take, or I take in particular, I take a bunch of different supplements. I already eat healthy naturally, but there's things that you want to help supplement. I know that it's not if I just took those, it would not work because I need to have a whole foods diet, not the actual grocery store, but a whole foods diet where I'm eating, whole foods. But the probiotic and prebiotic have seemed to work for me, and I've taken it probably like the last 4 years, and it makes me feel better. So I don't know if it's necessarily working or if it's a placebo, but I feel that way. What are your thoughts on biotics, probiotics, prebiotics, that sort of thing?
Yep. Understanding the exact strains of probiotics that we're using and the ability to adjust the microbiome is going to be an absolute game changer over the next 3 to 5 years. It's going to get better. We're going to understand it more. We're going to see all these strains and how they actually inhibit the gut, knowing that we'll not inhibit, but affect the gut. So taking that time to look into what strains we're using, are we making sure that they're relevant to where we are right now? Because if there's something like SIBO coming through and there's bacterial overgrowth in the wrong place, we can see that probiotic can actually be really bad or unhelpful to that process. If we're looking at adding in a probiotic and we've never added in before and we go a quite high dose, there's going to be a die-off effect of certain bacteria in our gut, and that's going to make us feel really shit for a couple of days. So taking that time to actually rebalance the gut and look at those foundations first, again, it's part of the pie, but it isn't the pie. So taking the time to look at the root cause and what are causing those first issues needs to happen first, and identifying for you what do we feel best on before we start adding in things on top, right? And I think the classic thing is adding in the probiotic, adding in the kombucha, and fixing gut health when we're not taking a look at what's happening with food, right?
Yeah.
When we're looking at things like our sugar intake, we're seeing gluten or dairy being a really resistant, and it might not be all of them, it could be 1 or 2 of them. We're taking that time to find those first and rebuild that body back up before we start trying to add things on top.
I love it. So I'll just give you a quick breakdown of a lot of the things that I might take, and maybe you can say, hey, that's a good thing, or maybe you should look at it. But this is just my research, and it's made my body feel really good. So I take athletic greens every single day, and I take that 1 scoop. But I also I supplement with some turmeric, some cinnamon, because from what I read, it helps decrease inflammation. Ginger, I put lemon in my water, stuff like that. I also supplement with sea salt in my water because of the minerals that we have. And obviously salt that has iodine in it is not good for you, but there is salt. The sea salt is good for you because of the minerals and magnesium.
Well, it completely depends. So again, this is going to be relevant to you, right? So iodine can be really helpful if we're seeing that there's a deficiency in certain thyroid hormones, right? So iodine and tyrosine are going to be really, really important to that.
Sure.
So whether we're hypo or hyper thyroid, we want to look at certain components of do we increase or decrease our sodium intake and also iodine. But adding in things like a Himalayan salt or adding in more of those minerals that we're not usually getting is going to be really helpful. And the amount of people we've worked with that we've found a really poor level of hydration in their body, taking that time to increase water is great, but taking the time to look at what are the nutrients that we're low in is a really, really important aspect. So whether that's the greens powder, whether it's the diving into things like zinc and magnesium, which 60-80% of people are in our modern world are still deficient in. Those are main nutrients that we want to build back up for so many functions in the body, right? It's 200 functions in the body usually that those come into play with. So whether that be testosterone function, whether that be energy production, whether that be assisting in digestive function, there's so many things that we want to look into. And sometimes, for a lot of us, our clients, we start to look at some level of testing to find out what those deficiencies might be. But if we're using sort of a broad spectrum greens powder, I tend to find that more helpful than a multi-vitamin a lot of the time, because we're starting to get a little bit more of that natural. There's less processed stuff in there, and it's more of a broad spectrum. So it's sort of like your shotgun effect. You're not just going in a laser, but then we can find the time to, if we look through the blood work or further testing to find out what nutrients are we then deficient in, that can make a really big difference. But like I said, it's more about what are we taking out that's improving our health rather than adding back in, because I think the health space is getting, supplementation is still very new in today's society, and it's something that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But the trouble is we're starting to look at, okay, our diet's not very good, so let's look at this to add in and this to add in, right? And we start to get a 20 pill list of all these things we need to add on top, and there's definitely a place for those supplements once we know what's required. But for example, one of the big things in especially the US is we're starting to see a really, really big spiking of certain nutrients in foods, right? So we're seeing things added like our zinc or our calcium or our fiber for it to hit our little health tick, all right, to hit some level of nutrient requirements on food. And it's actually being required by the FDA to add in these nutrients for a food to be effective. They've completely missed the goal. The goal is supposed to be that food is nutritious, not that food is not nutritious and they have to add things on top. So when we're doing that and we're adding in synthetic folate to our meals, it's actually blunting our ability to take up proper methylated folate that the body can use. So there's all of these nutrients and all these components that come back to, as you said, Chris, the big part being whole foods as our start of our diet, is we're getting that natural spectrum of nutrients and minerals in our food, rather than just adding in things sort of haphazardly, because it can get really expensive without taking the time to look at high quality food as that base.
No doubt. And I think you hit it on the head, is being healthy or eating the correct foods first and foremost is going to be the best supplement out there. And then if you need these things, you can see a physician that can test your levels on magnesium and B12 and zinc and vitamin D and all this, because what I take isn't going to be necessarily great for everybody. With my skin complexion, I do take a vitamin D supplement because usually African Americans are vitamin D insufficient when you take a look at it, because our skin is a shield for the sun, and it protects us because of hotter climates. But if you are in the sun, first and foremost, and secondly, if your skin is shading the sun, you probably need some of that vitamin D. So that's something that I would take, but maybe you or other people out there may not need vitamin D because you're getting plenty of it with your day-to-day activities. And so I would just say that just because somebody or this group is taking or using these certain things doesn't mean that you have to use them. I think you need to use what you think works for your body, and that's kind of how I've done it. And things that I don't really think work, I don't use them. I'll try a bunch of things, but I don't necessarily use them unless I feel like I need them. And then a lot of it is how I feel. And if I'm feeling good, then I will use that as my barometer to either take it or not.
Of course, yes. And it's taking the time to look at, what works for you right now might be different than 6 months, because we're looking at the difference in sun from summer to winter, for example, right? It could be a big change in what we require. The second part that needs to be really, really looked at is who's pushing the supplement. Do they own the supplement company? We don't own a supplement company. We run a coaching program building a skill set, right? But looking at the second aspect, which is who's looking at the results, who's looking at the data. So are we looking at just going to a normal doctor? They're going to say, yep, those levels are good. That's normal. Well, normal is not what we're after. We're looking for optimal, right? So if we're taking that time to actually look into what's optimal, that can be a whole new level. And that can be sometimes a rather surprisingly big discrepancy.
Yeah, and you make a really good point about who is pushing this certain thing, and obviously in this world now, there, with vaccines being a big thing, whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, and should you do it, should you not do it, who's pushing that narrative, and it's important to understand where this is coming from. Pharmaceutical companies have been making, like if you look at Moderna and Pfizer's stock and Johnson and Johnson over the last year, you can see a huge increase in their stock price because these things are being pumped out to so many people. And the same thing goes for different supplement companies and whatnot. So it's very important that you do your research on where these things are being derived from and who's going to actually be, benefiting and profiting from it.
100%. Yeah, and we want to look at, for the first time potentially, if the question is asked is, okay, now we're worried what's in a vaccine, right? Whether we're for or against it. What about the burger you ate that's gone from 100% meat to now 60% at best, right? That's where the real problem lies. Is there's going to be a capitalistic approach at some level, but taking that time to realize there has to be a balance between both your profit margins and also the quality of the food, I think needs to be huge, because people are up in arms about this thing that's come up. But we need to look at food as a whole and as an industry to realize that we're losing more and more of the actual nutrients that comes in, and we're adding in random stuff that a body can't use anyway. And that's where a lot of, if it's foreign to say, we can't even pronounce the ingredients in there, it's going to be pretty foreign for that body to break down. And I think that's a bigger argument that needs to be looked at when we're looking at building up the immune system, building up how that body functions, is actually getting back to real food.
You briefly touched on inflammation, but tell me, how important is inflammation to your overall health and well-being, and then certain foods to stay away from, like seed oils and things like that, which inflame the body?
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's so much we can dive into, and I think understanding inflammation is not our culprit, right? It's like cortisol; it's neither bad nor good. We just need to manage that properly. If it's acute, that's fine. It's there to actually help us. If it's chronic and it's been there for a while, that's where those issues are really going to come through. So, getting an idea of what's causing that inflammation and getting to the bottom of finding that root cause rather than trying to add in patch fixes is such a experimental process for you as an individual. And whether that comes from an awareness standpoint, or if you get someone in your corner to help with that testing aspect, which we do a lot with our clients, it's allowing you to go into that space and find out what are those inflammatory signals that are causing that to be more chronic than it should be. So some examples that we could use to start with, as you mentioned, seed oils is a really, really big one. Now, especially in the States, like 80% of those oils are rancid before they even hit your trolley, right? It's insane how many people don't know about that. And it's your clear plastic containers, it's your canola crops and all of this stuff that's coming through. We can even go down the route of how potentially our vegetarian diet's supposedly more healthy. Do you look at how many crops they absolutely decimate, right? We look at how that process of harvesting that stuff is actually just as toxic to the body and the environment. Another argument for another day, but taking that time to realize that we're looking at these inflammatory markers are everywhere, and that can get really, really overwhelming really quickly. I know I have been, when you dive down all these rabbit holes and you realize, oh yeah, that's against me, and oh, this is against me, and it's everywhere. So taking the time to just isolate that internal stress and managing how we're thinking, how we're feeling, and making sure that at the root cause of what we're trying to do with this health pursuit needs to come first, because I think we can get really, really fanatical about trying to improve this and that when we realize it's all not really with us. And we need to take that time to just pick our wins, right? We're never going to get perfection. We're living in a pretty massive society with a lot of stuff going on. So we need to find out, where do we pick those wins and what are those first steps for you? So if we're trying to find those quick wins, we're trying to start with what do we focus on first? Well, food and water is going to be a great place to start, right? What are we eating? What are we drinking? If we're looking at those foods, as you said, seed oils would be my first one on my list anyway. The amount of toxicity coming through there, the amount of those oils that are being changed is going to be number one. And it's not simply the direct digestive effect that they may have, but it's the long-term impact of digesting those oils and those toxins that's going to make it really, really challenging for the body to function at a high level. So for that mental clarity to come through, for you drop extra body fat, because those oils are holding the toxins, right? As soon as that's getting in the body, your body's going to hold on to those toxins in your fat. So unless you sweat out those toxins and go through not a detox, but a protocol to actually remove those toxins from the body, it's going to be really, really hard to drop some of that extra body fat. So oils is a really, really good place to start. if we dive
So
further into
let me jump in just real quick. Sorry, the landscapers are doing their thing. I don't know if you could hear that or not.
okay, yep.
But the packaging of these seed oils, is that also a major contribution to some of the bad things, like with the phthalates that I've read that are in the plastics that contain these seed oils?
Yeah, it's both the oils themselves and then it's what they're packaged in. So it's a bit of a double whammy for sure. If we were going to dive a little bit more into the other ones, again, we can look at a pretty expansive list. But if we start to look at things like our soy, our corn, and then our dairy gluten, are going to be some pretty big components there, right? The gluten dairy is something that I think we're aware of. And I think managing that, I think giving yourself at least a month to remove that from the diet and get an idea of how you feel without those before we start to look at a bit of a reintroduction protocol. And what I mean by that is one food or one ingredient at a time, not a cheeseburger. It allows us to see what we feel best on. But if we start to look into, I think the more important part being the things like the soy, the corn, the oils that we're using, it's a much higher risk in regards to the toxicity of what that's doing to the body that we need to get back out to build that body back up.
So everybody stay away from those seed oils. Talk about why diets don't work.
Yeah, I think that it's really the underlying that we've talked about for majority of this podcast is understanding the goal is never just fat loss, and the goal is not just a 4-week goal, right? You want to make sure that you feel good in 4 weeks, you feel good in 4 months, you feel good in 4 years. So why are we taking such a short-term approach? We're getting a taste of success and then completely decimating our long-term ability to keep it. And the reason we're doing that is because we're starting with a classic calorie deficit, which comes quite easily from just dropping your food down, provided we can deal with a bit of suffering, right? But if we're doing that, our body's going to have to readjust to that new level of function. If you keep doing that, you're going to start suppressing down how that body actually functions on a day-to-day basis to operate at that new level, right? You go from 2,000 calories down to 1,800, down to 1,600, down to 1,200, down to 1,000, right? We start seeing under 1,000. Now our personality is completely changed. Now we forget where our keys are every day. Our immune system's completely shot, right? We're taking that time to look at a short-term goal, and we're completely removing our ability to look at this long-term. So as soon as we go back to even normal calories when we're away on holiday, our body's putting on fat at a massive rate. So we're looking at that completely wrong. Yes, there's a thermodynamic effect, and that's clearly going to play a role. But there's much more to play with than just dropping our food intake down. How about we look at building this body back up, right? It's still going to do the same thing. And by that, it's not necessarily just exercising more, right? That's a simple way of looking at it. If you're not exercising at all, clearly that's going to be a helpful first step. But taking the time to look at getting your gut health on your side, taking the time to look at your stress and to look at the inflammatory markers that are suppressing how that body works, right? The whole purpose of that and how we approach nutrition and health is building that body back up. What are those components that are making you not function like you should? What's not working like it should that's making your body burn so much less, right? And it's not just as simple as exercising harder. We need to look at sometimes actually exercising less, right? And the amount of people that we've worked with, we're like, man, I'm eating so much food and I'm dropping body fat. Well, how does that work if we're used to a calorie restriction the whole time, right? We're building that body back up. It's feeling like it used to. We feel like the athlete we used to be because we're starting to get things functioning and firing and blowing out the cobwebs.
Are you a proponent of intermittent fasting, and what are your thoughts on it?
It's all relevant. I think just taking the time to look at what that person really needs, right? If stress is high, if you're training regularly, if you demand more out of your body and you want to make sure it's really functioning at a high level, stress is going to be killing any sort of progress you're going to get from something like fasting. Now, looking at fasting, we need to look at what is that, because we all fast, right? And I think people lean on the benefits of fasting and like, well, hang on, we're all getting that because we all fast for at least 8 hours, 10 hours, maybe even 12. And that can be really helpful for most people. But if we start going to 14, 16 plus, we're getting to a point that becomes another stress on the body, right? And if we're someone that is not recovering well, if we're training regularly and we enjoy regular training, if we're not sleeping properly, then it's just going to be another stress stacked on top of everything else. So for us, we're not just keto, just fasting, or to be honest, we're none of them, because all of them are too restrictive to one particular focus, and removing food groups or eating one meal a day is not the way to do it. It's to build a skill set of what you feel best on, and what happens on Monday today compared to 3 weeks from now might be some small alterations in how your lifestyle is built out. So taking that time to look at what you require. I think too many people are not taking the time to understand their body and rather would like to be told what to do without listening to their own body. So I think it's an argument that we'll continue to have, but I think a lot of the time it's because people would much rather be told what to do than actually listen to their own body.
For sure. And talk to me about sleep. How can you get better sleep? I mean, I think a lot of people, especially high performers, have a trouble sleeping from time to time. So how can you get better sleep, and how can your habits throughout the day help you with that?
Yep, it's very much that. It's habits, right? And I think everyone's heard the cooler room, the blackout curtains, the giving yourself time before bed to digest the food. Like, they're all really helpful steps. Like, removing that TV from your bedroom kind of needs to happen. But if we look at the other components of effective sleep, one, we're looking at that nutrition element, right? Are we eating well that allows us to calm our body down? If we're not having carbohydrates in the last meal, we don't have to. But if we're not, and we're seeing that stress is a huge component of our day, or we're training really regularly and we're trying to do the whole no carbs after 6, our body is going to be tired but wide. We're not able to calm down in a day. But so, like, having carbs in that last meal can be a really, really nice component. Now, the difference between an ice cream and that being some low glycemic rice or something along those lines is going to be very different on how that body responds. How you feel on a long grain rice versus potato versus your something else you add in, like your nachos, you're going to feel very different person to person. So finding out what you feel best on, what you sleep best on. If it's nachos, then go hard. But usually it's going to take the time to find that whole foods base, and trying to make sure that you're fueling the body for not just better performance during the day, but we're being a little more proactive to be productive tomorrow by eating well and anchoring a nice routine tonight. So the other component of that would simply be having in those habits, anchoring in those times for those habits, because if there's nothing else you do, having a consistent wake up and bedtime, not just Monday to Friday, but Monday to Sunday, is going to be the best place to start. It's going to tie right into your circadian rhythm. It's going to tie right into your natural cortisol spikes in the day that wake you up. And it's going to make sure that we can actually get that deep, restful sleep, because your body knows when it's coming.
Would there be any supplementation for sleep that you would recommend? I mean, a lot of people would take melatonin or different things like that, but melatonin only helps you go to sleep or fall asleep. It doesn't actually sustain your sleep. So if you have to wake up and go to the bathroom, you may be up the rest of the night and you took the melatonin. So talk to me if there's anything out there that you would suggest for people to look into, or is it just more of your habits before you go to sleep are going to help you while you're asleep?
Yeah. So again, it's coming in, what are we removing or what are we improving before we think about slapping in a bunch of supplements, right? And I think melatonin is one that's well overused, because we've got to remember it's a hormone, right? If we start adding in a hormone all that regularly, we sleep well when we have it, we sleep less well when we don't, and now we rely on the thing, right? And if we rely on anything, I think that's a problem, whether it be coffee, whether it be magnesium, whether it be something coming through. We want to make sure there's a balance of what's coming through in the body. And if we're adding in hormones, we've got to realize that that's diminishing or not improving, at very minimum, our own natural production. Now, if we've got a natural cortisol and melatonin rhythm, and we're having a natural circadian rhythm, then that melatonin should be produced well by the body. But if you're using coffee to wake up in the morning and melatonin to go to sleep, now we're basically functioning with external sources, and that becomes a really, really big spiral that we want to get out of really quickly. So taking the time to look at those components of our routine, and looking at the time that we can't sleep harder by adding in an external thing. We need to look at actually check ourselves in the mirror, and are we taking those steps to manage our stress, manage that mental chatter, manage some sort of night routine, so we're not reliant on screens till 10 p.m. and then we just hit the hay, right? Taking that time to build that base first needs to be step one. And I think it's this conversation of supplements and quick fixes and all that stuff, which I get it, right? It's easier. We don't have to look at our lifestyle, but we need to look at all these components if we want to invest more into us as a human, rather than just invest more into a bottle of supplements.
If you have a television in your bedroom and you like to watch television prior to going to sleep, would blue light glasses help assist in, the decreased light and not taking in so much blue light from the television, or it doesn't really matter and you should probably remove it anyway?
Yeah, my first question is, do you actually want to change? Remove the damn thing. Stop trying to find ways around it. Blue lights, I use them all the time. I've got like a normal clear one during the day, and then which I should be wearing, and then I've got a red one that I'll use usually after 7 p.m. So the last sort of 2-3 hours of the day. And if there's some work that I need to finish off, if I'm just finishing a webinar or a live training, if I've got a couple of things I need to finish off, or I'm simply watching a damn movie, that's going to be a normal part of society, and it's going to be something that we look at what are the quick wins we can have, because it's definitely better than not having it, right? So definitely that blue light exposure and managing that stimulus to the brain through the eyes is a really, really good place to start. You got to realize your skin is just as important, right? And you can look at this with, you start dipping your hands into paint when you're working on a house, or you start to get these toxins and chemicals on our face with cosmetics or cleaning products, whatever it might be. Our body absorbs those nutrients, right? Just as much as it absorbs those nutrients, it absorbs those lights. So unless you want to wear a full burqa and your blue lights to bed, we're still going to have some sort of light coming through. So I think it's really a case of there's making good wins, and if it's a late night movie or whatever, then making those changes to make it better, 100%. But if it comes an everyday habit, there's better ways of doing it. And if you really want to improve your health, it's a case of redesigning your lifestyle so that you're getting the best possible outcome.
And if some people sleep just fine with going to bed right before and watching television, is that a bad thing, or it just works for them?
The short answer is most people were relying on the screen to unwind rather than taking the time to actually unwind, right? They sit on the couch because they're tired, they get up, they're still tired, it hasn't actually achieved anything, they've just blocked out 2 hours of their day because they don't want to learn how to relax, or they don't want to take the time to get rid of the mental chatter, right? Nobody stops anymore and actually asks, how do I feel, right? They look at the phone when I've got 5 minutes of silence. I look at the TV when I've had enough of the kids, right? Nobody's taken the time to look at themselves in the mirror and realize what they need to slow down. And I think that can be a really scary start, but taking that time to turn the TV off 30 minutes early and just do a quick stretch on the ground while breathing, or taking the time to go read a book, or do something that's not so damn so much stimulus that's causing that issue, that's telling you to not think, to not feel, to just be completely disconnected from that body, right? And I think if we can start to go back to that just for 30 minutes a day, what that does to your awareness through the day is going to be absolutely game-changing to your happiness, game-changing to your performance, game-changing to your connection with family. These are all the things we know we want, but we're not taking the time to actually turn inward. And I think sometimes if we put that hard foot down, I'm not really bringing in a huge amount of fluff. I want to make sure you start with the steps that are actually going to make some change.
Well, it's tough love, and some of the things that that you shouldn't be doing, you still do anyway, and it's hard to change these old habits, especially if you had a habit of watching television for so long. I know what my wife and I, that's kind of how we unwind after we put the kids down, and we watch an hour of our program, and then kind of find ourselves tired, and then end up falling asleep. So selfishly, I ask a lot of these questions because I want to know if there's other ways that I can optimize, or we can optimize our lives based on the things that we're doing. Can we be a little bit better? Can we be a little bit healthier so we can live a little bit longer?
And the big thing to bring up there is not that the TV to unwind is the bad thing. Is that the last thing you do before you get to bed, right? So if we're putting the kids to sleep, we're watching something for a bit of downtime, like by all means do that. But if it's right up until 10 p.m. and you're trying to go to bed straight after, you've compromised your sleep, right? I still watch TV with my partner and going through that process of watching something we want to watch. But if it's something that is completely taking up all of the time that we spend together, we no longer have a partner next to us. It could be any random. What are we doing to actually be a couple, to be in that family together? And I think taking that time to do something, getting away from that screen for some time before we go to sleep, is going to be really helpful.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I don't have any issues falling asleep. My wife has issues going to sleep. Her mind kind of races. I can fall asleep anywhere. If I got 10 minutes, I'm gonna fall asleep most of the time. But she has really a really difficult time. It could be an hour before she actually goes to bed. While I've been in REM sleep for an hour, she's still up. So maybe
do it for her then. There you go. You found somewhere to start.
maybe we change our approach, and we do a 10-minute stretch and meditation right before we go to bed, where at least we can have the television off, and maybe it might help her sleep. Now my sleeping, I have issues as soon as if I have to wake up and go to the bathroom, then it's hard for me to reset and then go back to sleep.
So you want to know why, or where we're going with that?
Oh no, I would love to know why if you know, but that's just I was just giving you an example.
Yeah, man. Well, there's so many things that could be. I'm not going to give you a prescription. It would have to be to work with you individually. But something that we see come through a lot if it's happening in the night is we want to look at what components are the issue, right? So getting to sleep, staying asleep, or waking up and not feeling like I've had any deep sleep at all. And there's going to be components that we look into for all of those. But three that we always look at first is stress at some level, and getting an idea of where is that coming up in the day. So we've got that chronic level of stress the whole way through the day. That tends to happen when we wake up at 3 o'clock with a new idea and we need to write things down, right? Because we're not unwinding properly. That's hands up to me for that one. The second one could be an idea of toxic load on the body and liver function, right? If we're having to get up to pee a lot of the time, we can be trying to excrete a lot of those toxins, right? So we can, if we're finding that, provided there's no issues with the bladder or anything, it's usually not a bladder issue, right? Our bladder is really, really resilient. It's usually a lot more to do with that toxin exposure and trying to really clear out the way that body works. Now, it's not going to be all the time. A lot of time, our brain's involved in this as well. It's become a habit for so damn long that we're so used to waking up at 2 a.m. But if we can look at some of these components of getting that body healthy, that's why I said one of the biggest things for sleep is both the habits, but yes, your nutrition as well, not by just what we get in, but what we might take out to improve that toxic load. So that's something we see a ton, and people start sleeping the whole way through the night. They start getting deeper sleep because they're taking that time to actually sleep at a deeper level. The third one could be a look at that sugar control, right? That glucose control in the body. So if we're waking up and we're doing this every sort of 2 hours or every 1 hour or 3 hours, whatever it might be, in that sort of range, we could find that we're really not utilizing glucose particularly well. And we might want to look at both our insulin sensitivity through how we eat. We want to look at what we're having in our last meal. Those are three areas that we'd definitely look at if sleep was a problem.
Interesting. I'm definitely going to take a look at that because I tend to get up at the same time every night to go to the bathroom, and it may be a habit or maybe something that we put in that's in the diet. I don't eat too much sugar. Maybe that could be an issue, but yeah, they're definitely good thoughts. As we move on, tell me about the Meta project and kind of all the great things you're doing.
Yeah, man, it's been a pretty cool little journey, to be honest. We're working with about 200 clients currently actively. We've worked with at least 1,000 clients up to this point through just the Meta project, not including my personal training stuff, to really understand what that process is. And when you work with that many people, it allows you to understand where those roadblocks are and plan for them before they even know they're coming. So the sequence we work through with our clients is understanding we know exactly what that sequence of events they're going through and what they're going to feel at each point, so we can plan for that process to be as easy as possible so we can get their body back on their side. We have incredible specialists in our mindset space, in the clinical nutrition, in our exercise space, so that we have all those specialists to lean on rather than them all just coming to me. So we have our success coaches, we have our specialist, we can dive into all those spaces. So it's no longer, Olly being the main brand and it all comes from me. It's, well, I'm leaning on better humans than myself to make this a really, really important journey, which has been really cool. So for me, it's been a space that allows us to dive into all the components we've talked about today and build out that series of events. We use what we've now built called the R4 method, which takes us through that process of building back up that gut and making sure that we're getting our body back on our side. That ultimately is the biggest goal. We've got people dropping tons of body fat while eating more. We've got people finally exercising or going for their first run in 10 years, right? Really feeling good in their own skin. But we could go through that all day. I think it's just that understanding of how's that body working, not just going through one lens of exercise or nutrition, but now we're looking at the full space of health and how do we optimize that to you as an individual. It's been pretty fun.
That's awesome, man. That's really good, and working with so many people, you're changing lives for the better, and that's tremendous. How do you remain consistent on the things that you're preaching? As coaches, we have a lot of things that we're trying to hold other people accountable for, but sometimes it's really difficult for us to stay accountable as well. So talk to me about how you stay accountable to yourself and stay consistent as well.
Yeah, for me, I've just got a really strong vision, and I always have, of what I want to be or how I want to feel and look, right? And that's something that I'm pulling towards, not something I'm running away from, right? So rather than it being like, I need to drop this body fat, I don't want to look this way anymore, these sort of negative thoughts, and we all have them. But taking that time to realize it's overpowered by a vision of where I want to be and how I want to feel, even when I've just come out of that crash and trying to build the body back up. I'm like, this is where I'm going. This is how I'm going to get there. And this is the first leg workout I need to do to get there, right? So it's no longer an emotional decision of, it's raining outside or I don't feel like it today. It's really back to, well, this is the game plan. This is the time of day I train, and I'm going to take that just as seriously as getting on the podcast with you today, right? This time is my time, and this is how I'm going to move forward for that goal. So I don't get it always right. I'm always pulling myself from that one more email, and there's always that night where you don't sleep just as well as you think. So it's taking that time that nothing is ever going to be perfect, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes removing the emotional from that space is really helpful. And what I mean by that is we make the emotion in that space out of comfort, and I think that's what sometimes our biggest challenge is, to overcome that challenge and that comfort in that space, right? So getting out of bed, or actually going for a walk, or just taking that first step out the door. I think that's that initial win every single day. Once you're at the gym, once you're making those changes, you feel good. It's always feeling good in your body. So for me, it's always been just leaning into the long-term outcome rather than the short-term satisfaction or comfort, and just seeing how many of those challenges or battles I can win. Because if we lean into comfort long enough, it no longer becomes a comfort, it becomes discontent and discomfort with where we're stuck. So I think just having that balance and looking a bit more long-term has generally been something I've tried to lean back into.
You talked about winning and the battles that you win, and understanding that you're not going to win every time, but understanding that the wins that you do have are extremely important. And I always say this, like, I don't have to win at everything. I just have to win at most things. And if I win at most things, I'm going to be pretty successful, just like yourself, man. So you've been an actual inspiration to me today, because I'm always trying to optimize and think of different ways that I can improve my life. And so the things that you have touched on today have already helped me selfishly, and I know that it's going to help the listeners too. So at this point, is there anything that you would like to plug? Where can everybody follow you and potentially work with you in the Meta Project and all the great things that you're doing?
I appreciate it, man. It's been good to talk to you as well. You, me, and the landscaper. It's been a good conversation. Diving into, if you want to dive in deeper into our world, you'll find us through the Meta Project, or just Olly Wood without the H. Olly Wood will be really easy to find me on Instagram, Facebook, all that good stuff. If you want to dive deeper into our world and you want to get a feel for what this looks like without sort of jumping straight into our program, we've run a 5-day challenge for 2 or 3 months now, which we've had fantastic response because we're not just thinking about, hey, here's a diet plan or here's one video to think about. Let's walk you through our world for 5 days, look at the nutrition component, look at the training, look at the sleep, and just plug one thing in. At very minimum, you're going to really walk away with a lot of some of our best content from our Meta Project site. At best, you want to work with us further and dive deeper into our world, get some deeper testing, build that gut back up, and become the new man, become the new woman that you want to be.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and really appreciate you joining the show.
No worries, Chris.